Test, test, test. Geles vigor. Perfect. Good evening, everyone. We're going to be starting with this evening's seminar very, very shortly. We are running a little bit late. So in the meantime, we're going to have a video about the AMAC, or the AMAA, and their operations and their evangelic ministries all across the world. We're just running a bit short, but please watch this video, and we will start very shortly. Thank you.
The Armenian evangelical movement was born during a 19th century cultural renaissance. Its founders took on a mission to renew the spiritual life of their nation. 37 men and 3 women signed a statement of faith and established the first evangelical church in Pera, Constantinople on Sunday, July 1, 1846. Quality education at all levels, open to all, was embraced by Armenian evangelicals. They were pioneers in this era, opening the eyes and minds of fellow Armenians. From 1846 to 1915, the Armenian Evangelical Church established over 130 churches, 400 schools, and 3 theological seminaries. Armenian evangelical unions formed to connect all the churches and grew to include at least 50,000 people. Armenian evangelicals promoted the education of women from the start of their movement, establishing schools and colleges for women. Many went on to become teachers in the growing education sector. Armenian evangelicals also ran colleges and seminaries with missionaries. They provided higher education to thousands of Armenian young people who went on to be leaders in their communities. In 1881, in Worcester, Massachusetts, Armenian evangelicals established the first Armenian church in the U.S., which became Armenian Church of the Martyrs. The number of Armenian evangelical churches in the eastern U.S. grew to 8 by 1901, when they formed the Armenian Evangelical Union of Eastern States, and to 20 by 1914. On the West Coast, there were 3 Armenian evangelical churches by 1908, and they formed the Armenian Evangelical Union of California. Overwhelming news of atrocities in their ancestral homeland began reaching U.S. Armenian evangelical churches in 1915. Armenians marched into the deserts, families massacred, churches and schools and cultural buildings destroyed by the Turks. The Union of Eastern States had one question for its 1917 meeting: what will be the role of the Armenian Evangelical Church in the task of the reconstruction of our nation? Capable leaders were commissioned to propose a response. At the Armenian Church of the Martyrs on June 7, 1918, the Armenian Evangelical Union of the Eastern States founded the Armenian Missionary Association of America. The Armenian Evangelical Union of California quickly signed on to support the new organization and welcomed first AMAA Executive Secretary Reverend Miran Kalajan as he visited them. Tremendous organizational work went into sending aid, helping orphans and refugees, and re-establishing Armenian evangelical communities and churches in the Near East. The Armenian Evangelical Church raised up the first and all succeeding generations of AMAA leaders. During World War II, the Armenian Evangelical Church of New York placed all its facilities at the disposal of the AMAA, while its senior pastor, Reverend Antranik Badikian, worked as the AMAA Volunteer Executive Secretary. Reverend Badikian organized the 1946 centennial celebration of the Armenian Evangelical Church's founding. The worldwide activities raised $150,000, $50,000 more than the goal. This made the AMAA self-sufficient for the first time and boosted the Armenian Evangelical Church into a new mission-oriented era. With support from Armenian evangelical churches, the AMAA strengthened and expanded newly established schools and communities in the Near East. The Mohagian family, Stephen Philibosian, and the AMAA worked together to establish Higazian College in Beirut. Through wartime tests of faith and periods of expansion, Armenian evangelicals have supported this institution faithfully, raising up thousands of leaders committed to truth, freedom, and service. The Armenian Evangelical Church's focus on youth fellowship led AMAA to support camp ministries in the Near East, Europe, the Americas, North and South, and Turkey. On distant continents, Armenian evangelical churches organized to support AMAA projects and maintain ties of fellowship. Still educating its young and illuminating minds with the truth in the place of its founding, the Gedik Pasha Armenian Evangelical Church in Istanbul, under the directorship of Hrant Guzelian, gave shelter to the young Hrant Dink and built Camp Arman. The 1988 earthquake and the war in Nagorno-Karabakh galvanized the Armenian Evangelical Church and AMAA to pivot toward Armenia. Into the formerly closed Soviet Republic they flowed with volunteers and aid, determined to help. Earthquake Relief Medical Missions, the Orphan and Child Care Mission, the Armenian Milk Fund were all established during this difficult period, with the loving support of the Armenian Evangelical Church of the Diaspora. In the midst of these difficulties, a new era was born. On September 21, 1991, the Armenian Evangelical Church gave thanks worldwide as the Republic of Armenia declared its independence. The AMAA mobilized to serve the re-established Armenian nation. In the years following independence, the AMAA established new Armenian evangelical churches, community centers, daycare centers, medical missions, schools and camps in the Republic of Armenia and Artsakh. The AMAA's investment in the Armenian nation through its Christian mission is the Armenian Evangelical Church's founding vision. On the occasion of its own centennial, the AMAA visited Armenian evangelical churches around the world, from New Jersey to Australia, Canada to South America, Yerevan and Gyumri to Los Angeles. In Gyumri, where the 1988 earthquake caused so much devastation and rebuilding is still going on, the AMAA dedicated a new community center. In Los Angeles, the AMAA concluded its worldwide centennial celebration with a look to the future. Now 173 years old, the Armenian Evangelical Church is an integral part of the Armenian nation in the diaspora and in the homeland of Armenia, acknowledged and respected for its contributions, continuing to worship in faith and do good works. The legacy of the Armenian Evangelical Church has been a glowing halo of service in educational, spiritual, cultural, social, and physical needs. Its new generation of young men and women are joining AMAA missions to the homeland, bringing the love of God and hope for the future. The Armenian Evangelical Church entrusted to the AMAA, its mission agent, a legacy of faith, love, and service. Both continue today in global fellowship, united in witness and mission, building a strong foundation on the good news of the gospel and inspiring young people to serve the Armenian nation. We salute the global Armenian Evangelical Church.
Հոգեշնոր հոգևոր հայրեր, հարգարժան հոգապարծության և վարչական ներկայացուցիչներ եկեղեցիներու և գազմագերբություններու, Կալիֆորնիայեն հատկապես ժամանած ճարտարապետ և այս իրիկվա տասախոս Ronald Altoon, սիրելի երաժիշտ արվեստագետներ, հայրենագիցներ, ողջունենք ձեր բոլորին. Honored church fathers, esteemed guests, John Fuller, representing the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, Mr. Ronald Altoon, church family and fellow community members, welcome to this evening's seminar hosted by the Armenian Missionary Association of Canada. My name is Remy Gergis, and on behalf of the Armenian Missionary Association of Canada, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's seminar entitled Monasteries and Churches of Ancient Armenia, a photographic pilgrimage by Ronald Altoon. This evening will allow us to take a closer look at the cultural and religious landmarks that make up the fabric of Armenian land, and that is the Armenian Church. And we have a notable Armenian-American architect and former national president of the American Institute of Architects, Mr. Ronald Altoon, to lead us in this evening's seminar. Before we proceed, we'd like to thank the AMAC for holding the seminar, and of course the Armenian Evangelical Church of Toronto for graciously opening their doors to us this evening. Գուզենք Թորոնտոյի հայ ավետարանական եկեղեցին շնորհակալություն հայտնել հատկապես, որ դրամատրեց այս վայրը այս իրիկվան հայդակրին համար եւ անշուշտ նաեւ շնորհակալություն խնդրել Կանադայի հայ ավետարանչական միության, որ գազմագերբեց այս տասախոսությունը։ Այս իրիկվան հայդակիրը սկսենք անդրադառնալով Կանադայի հայ ավետարանչական միության սկզբնական օրերուն։ Կանադայի հայ ավետարանչական ընկերակցության խաղապարի հղացման նիստը Ամերիկայի հայ ավետարանչական ընկերակցության օրինագով դեղի ունեցավ շաբաթ 29 մայիս 1982-ին Թորոնտոյի հայ ավետարանական եկեղեցիին մեջ մասնակցությամբ Կանադայի տարածքին վրա ծառայող 4 հայ ավետարանական եկեղեցիներու եւ իր ներկայության Ամերիկայի հայ ավետարանչական ընկերակցության ներկայացուցիչներուն։ Այս նիստին ադենաբեդ ընտրվեցավ վերաբադվելի Եսայի Սարմազյան եւ ադենատբիր բարոն Միհրան Ջիզմեջյան։ Մարտ 17 1984-ին հիմնվեցավ Կանադայի հայ ավետարանչական ընկերակցությունը երկու կորզաթիր տնօրեններու օրով վերաբադվելի Գիրագոս Շոփուրյան եւ վերաբադվելի Մովսես Ժամբազյան որպես ներքին դաշտի վարիչ եւ Կանադայի հայ ավետարանչական ընկերակցության հիմնադիր անդամներ, ինչպես այս եկեղեցին անխոնջ հավատարիմ անդամ բարոն Անտիպաս Լուսարարյան եւ շատ ուրիշներ։ Իսկ այս ընկերակցության հիմնական նպատակը ինչ էր։ Սադարել եւ օգնել Հայաստանի, Արցախի եւ Սփյուռքի մեջ հաստատված ազգագիծներուն գրոնապարոյական աճումին եւ հասնել անոնց բոլոր գարիքներուն, ըլլա բժշկական նյութական եւ գրթական ծրագիրներով, որբեսի անոնք հաստատ եւ հավատարիմ մնան իրենց հայրերուն քրիստոնեական հավատքին վրա։ Before we begin this evening seminar, just a brief history of the early days of the AMAC. March 17, 1984, a pivotal day in the history of the Armenian evangelical community in Canada, the day the AMAC was established. Following the lead of its sister organization and our American counterpart, the AMAA, 4 Armenian evangelical churches in Canada, so one in Toronto, one in Cambridge, and 2 in Montreal, met in the presence of the AMAA's executive director, Reverend Giragos Chopurian, and the field director, Reverend Moses B. Jambazyan. And a decision was made to apply to the Canadian government for charitable status for the association. A little over 2 years later, and after a great deal of hard work, the AMAC is formed. A noble vision that was succeeded by 4 decades of educational, social service, childcare, relief, as well as evangelistic ministries in 24 countries around the world. A vision that continues to contribute to the essential needs of our Armenian compatriots in the homeland and all across the diaspora. From education and summer camps, the AMAC supports nurseries, kindergartens, schools, and a university in Armenia, as well as academic institutions across the diaspora. The Shor After-School Educational Day Center, an after-school program in Armenia that serves over 400 students who require supplementary educational assistance. The Khoren and Shushanik Avedisyan School in Yerevan, with over 700 students, and a green building which became the first of its kind in environmental design in Armenia, and much, much more. Disaster relief, helping preserve the Christian community in Syria to helping the Armenian community in Lebanon through the recent Together for the Armenians of Lebanon benefit concert held in Toronto last November. The Together for Armenians of Artsakh benefit concert held in Toronto and Montreal in March of last year. The AMAC's mission is clear, providing relief to the oftentimes neglected and consistently threatened Christian Armenians around the world. The mission of the AMAC from the beginning has been to strengthen the spiritual life of our churches and to rebuild the ruined churches of the homeland. The latter being a perfect tie-in to the reason we're here in this evening's topic, monasteries and churches of ancient Armenia. But before we share more about Mr. Altoon and this evening's seminar topic, I'd like to invite Mr. Levon Kalemkerian and Mrs. Aline Bachakchan. They will be singing Armenian pieces, Pari Arakil and Imani. Whenever you're ready.
Artoon gadari.
Շնորհակալ ենք պարոն Կալեմքերյան եւ Դիգին Բճակյան, որ ձեր դաղանդները մեր հետ գրծակ բաժնեկցիլ. Just before we get to this evening's seminar, a few more words to introduce our speaker. Church architecture describes visually the idea of the sacred, which is a fundamental need of man. These are the words of prolific Swiss architect Mario Botta. The necessity and significance of a church as an architectural landmark or a physical embodiment of the faith is an idea that rings even truer for a race of people whose, in the words of William Saroyan, structures have been crumbled. Between 1989, following the horrific Spidak earthquake, and through 2024, architect Ronald Altoon made 18 trips to Armenia. On each visit, he traveled to and photographed over 40 ancient religious and educational historic landmarks. In this evening's seminar, we will take a look at early Christian buildings of the 5th to 14th centuries constructed in strategically defendable geographic locations of historic Armenia and Artsakh, buildings that predate the early churches and great cathedrals in Europe. Ronald Altoon is former national president of the American Institute of Architects and was founding designer of Altoon Partners, which he established in 1984 and ran for 30 years. As an internationally recognized architect, he is the author of 7 books on design, with more in pre-publication. Outside, there will be a sign-up sheet that you can add your names to be notified about the release of a potential forthcoming book by Mr. Altoon. For his humanitarian and professional leadership efforts after his work in Armenia following the 1988 Spidak earthquake, he was awarded the Memorial Medal from the Supreme Soviet of Armenia, SSR. Some of his other architectural credits in Armenia include a state-of-the-art academic building for the American University of Armenia in Yerevan, as well as his role advising the AMAA on the design of their Avedisian school, which became the first LEED certified building in the region, setting a national standard for environmental design. Aside from his professional career, Ronald Altoon has been married for 56 years to his wife, Judge Alice Churukian Altoon, and they share 3 children and 6 grandchildren. Mr. Altoon, thank you for being with us this evening. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening. I don't need that. Thank you all for your kind hospitality and warm welcome. Shad Shanor Hagalak, for joining me as I continue my journey here this evening. Is that up? No. It will be up. In truth, I've been referred to as a shish kebab Armenian more than once. It's not intended as a compliment, rather condescension in its overtone. It's as though the extent of my Armenian identity somehow migrated undetected into my stomach. Yet I am a 3rd-generation Armenian living in America. My paternal grandparents escaped the gathering storm of the Hamidian massacres in 1887 and immigrated from Marzavan, Asia Minor. On my mother's side, they fled the post-massacre prejudice in Malatya a few years later. Each so traumatized by their experiences that speaking English was their essential security blanket. I was thus denied the inheritance of my legacy tongue. My paternal grandparents arrived here with their young son, Hovannes. Granddad Krikor Altoon worked in an Armenian winery in Washingtonville, New York. And while there, my grandmother Elizabeth gave birth to 2 daughters. Living on the East Coast, Krikor was one of a few dozen Armenians who gathered to create the founding documents for the first Armenian Orthodox Church in Worcester, Massachusetts. Later, he would be a founder of Holy Cross Armenian Church, the first of our ethnicity in Los Angeles, where my parents would later be married. He was a pioneer of sorts. We call him a Mayflower Armenian. My maternal grandparents came independently to Fresno. There, Artoon Lulegin worked as a carpenter. We never met. Mary Tyan, who witnessed the bayonet execution of her father and older brother, and then was sequestered by German nuns, traveled alone at the age of 14 by sea and rail to Fresno, California, where she had an uncle. Fresno had received many other Armenians in the years before. Having honed her craft as a tailor, she worked tirelessly to bring her mother and younger sister and brother safely to California as well. These maternal grandparents met and married there. Both of my parents were born in Fresno in 1903 and 1911, respectively, and joined the growing community of Fresno Indians. This is a racist epithet, the consequence of skin darkened by working long hours in the crop fields of the Central Valley, and perhaps a bit too much dust and drink. Elizabeth gave birth to my father, Arthur Miron, on their family farm, an extraordinary story in and of itself, which I will touch on if anyone is interested in the Q&A following this talk. Marion Rose, my mother, remembered little of her childhood there. Her father enlisted in the United States Navy 3 times, becoming a chief petty officer on the USS Utah. And so Marion grew up as a Navy brat in Newport, Rhode Island, Staten Island, New York, Cavite in the Philippines, and Nagasaki, Japan, indulging in cultural curiosities that she would pass on to me with an eagerness to devour intellectually. Arthur was the first of his family to attend college, becoming a pharmacist, and became known as a mediator and peacemaker. Because of ethnic prejudice towards him, he would only have Armenian friends for the rest of his life. Marion, by contrast, was a trained classical pianist and grew to love the wide range of cultural ethnicities in Los Angeles, their music and cuisine, and was very ecumenical in her friendships. She loved science. What a mix. But musicians are perfectionists. Marion ceased using her Armenian first language at the age of 7 and stubbornly refused to teach it to me imperfectly. There were only 3 other Armenian kids in my entire high school, 1 in my grade. Marrying the only Armenian woman I ever dated, we have attended an Armenian evangelical church for all of the 56 years of our post-collegiate lives, yet many there thought I was an Odar, even one of our pastor's wives who knew me for over 40 years. I guess I assimilated. I guess I remained as such until the morning of December 7th, 1988, a morning when Americans generally commemorate the savage bombing of Pearl Harbor. On that day, an event of seismic proportions released my latent, suppressed Armenian DNA. It was when my Armenian journey began. It was a 6.8 Richter event in Spitak that launched my ongoing purpose to serve the Armenian community. It was also when my architectural interest in the monasteries and churches of ancient Armenia began. I invite you now to join me as we retrace some of those steps together. So, Maybe some of you may remember the coverage in Time magazine and Newsweek when the Spitak earthquake struck and so badly affected our community. When you look at this image, you can see the personalities of many different families that lived in this building, each wanting to be different one from another, but each afflicted in the same way. This was the central communications building for the region in Spitak. So I organized a disaster assistance team for the American Institute of Architects and took 6 people with me to Yerevan to work to master plan the rebuilding of the city of Spitak. This is a storyboard that I drew of the drawings that we prepared while we were there, showing the various aspects of things, and here my site plan for the entire town. And as we presented this, the senior architect in the country, who was also in the Politburo, heard that these Americans were there and came in and demanded an audience to be shown what we were doing. And as he was looking at it, he turned around and said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's a memorial chapel." And he said, "This is Soviet Armenia. We haven't built a church here since 1918. We don't build churches." And I looked at him and I said, "Your glorious Soviet system has caused the death of over 50,000 innocent people, including elderly, women, and children. You will build this in memory of them." And everybody was aghast at what I had said. And he looked at me and he said, "Well, if it's a church, the altar should be to the east." And I knew I had him. So this is the town square that was designed for that. And up here on the hill, whoa, what's happening here? Back up. Up here on the hill is where we built that church. But you'll see that in a moment. After our 16 days were over, 16 days of 18 hours a day, in one of the coldest winters on record, walking a mile up the hill to where we were working at 7 in the morning and 11 at night, walking back down the hill. After all those days and being emotionally distraught and having gone to all these towns and villages where people were crying on the street and so forth, is this advancing by itself? I'm not doing this. Okay, they took us here, and when I came into this monument and entered it, and the sound of the char guns was playing, my knees gave way, and I collapsed to the ground in tears. And I was that way for 20 minutes. And our host came up to me, this very senior architect in the country. He put his arm on my shoulder, and he said, "Now you're an Armenian." So we built the church. Anyway, someone built it in the same spot. That's the church, and it was, I would like to say, my first building in Armenia. So this will trace, while we were there, they took us around to 4 sites, 4 of the usual sites: Echmiadzin, Korvirab, Noravank, Garni, Gegart. That began my interest to look at these sites. So I thought I'd begin at the beginning. And the beginning is pre-Christian and pagan days, when Zoroaster was constructed at least 2,000 years before Stonehenge. And it was a pattern like that looked like this. And these incredible stones, so silent, so elegant, so noble, so beautiful, were very touching. So I begin at the beginning of religion, but not at the beginning of the Christian faith. And then the temple at Garni, 1st century, was the only Greco-Roman temple colonnaded building in Armenia or the Soviet Union. The site was like this, the building is like that. If anyone's been in the Maison Carrée in Nimes, it's a very similar building to this. It's one of the remarkably elegant Greco-Roman buildings, sited beautifully at the end of this gorge. This would be a UNESCO World Heritage Site if so much reconstruction had not happened to it. But it's very magical. Which takes us to Etchmiadzin. 301 to 303, considered the oldest cathedral in the world, founded by St. Gregory the Illuminator in the time of King Tiridates III. It is the Holy See. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So we'll go through this quickly. Most of you, if you've been to Armenia, have been here. Have you all been to Armenia? Anybody? Everybody? Hand up. Been to Armenia? Have you been here? Yes? Of course you have. Okay. So this is the largest quadrangle of this kind in the world, and the church. And I imagine that this church was built in two phases. I think it was really like a Greek cross that was like this, and then this was added later. So I commissioned a young Armenian architecture student at a university where I was on the board of trustees to produce as-built, not as-found, drawings of what buildings would have looked like in Armenia. So this is an as-built elevation. And as you walk around this building, as you walk through it, it's magnificently detailed and decorated. Many of the architectural gestures of the building seem very Persian, actually. The pointed arch as example and the faceted elements that run around the top of the dome. But it's nonetheless quite lovely, and the sense of the elevation of the dome almost levitating above those arches is magnificently done. Corvirop, 301, Armenia accepts Christianity as a state religion. This is where St. Gregory the Illuminator was imprisoned for 13, 14 years in the deep pit. So there it is, facing Mount Ararat and Western Armenia. There's the plan for that. Most of these compounds have a common thing. They're protected. They're either protected by a wall around them or the edge of a gorge, and you'll see that. So the church is in the center, and the lower corner here is where you come in and go down into that pit down below. So this is the church, very simple church, octagonal drum, octagonal dome. You'll see very similar elements in many of the churches that we visit tonight. And this is the step ladder that takes you down into that pit where St. Gregory was for so many years. When I went there on my first trip, my mother had died a short time before, 2 months before the Spitak earthquake. And I collected some soil from the bottom of that pit. You know, film used to come in little canisters, and I had canisters with me, so I emptied the film out and filled 4 of those with soil. When I came home, I poured 1 canister on my father's grave and 1 on my mother's, and I've got 1 at home for my wife and 1 for me. Altoon Church, 5th to 7th century. You can read about it here, but let's just go visit it. You up through the landscape, and you get to this cloistered church. The cloister is what wraps around it, that colonnade. It's outside space. You enter the church, and there are 3 aisles, 3 naves in the church, a central nave and 2 side aisles. And then there's the 4 pilasters in the middle that hold the dome that reaches way above. And there it is right there. You're beginning to see the evolution of what is a kind of a basilica form into a cross form in a church. And this is very important in terms of, I think, church history, not just Armenian church history, but church history. So here's the cloister on the left, Hajkar. And inside, you see that kind of, this piece right here? Remember that, we're going to come back to that later. That's called a pendentive. And there's the monument that's on the site. St. Haripsime is probably the most replicated church in the Armenian vocabulary, 7th century. It's a kind of a pure Euclidean geometry. Euclid was a mathematician, and he worked with circles, squares, triangles, rectangles, everything related to geometry. And it was so interesting to me that here you are in Armenia in the 600s, early 600s, and Euclidean geometry is being applied to a church and will be applied to churches forevermore. So here it is. It's a rather elegant building. The dome sits on a drum, which is rather overscaled for the size of the building. The carving into the facade on the side is to create lateral stability in the north-south axes. It sat originally within a quadrangle like this, and you can see those deep insets. And there it is as a drawing. And now you begin to see inside those same elements on the corners here and here, those pendentives there. It helps to transfer a circle into a square base. Put a circle on top of a square, you've got curved triangles in each corner. That's a pendentive. St. Gane is also near Etchmiadzin, 360. It's a 3-nave dome basilica, also World Heritage Site. There's the 3 aisles, 3 naves that run through. Here's the plan for it. You see the cloister in the front and the 3 entrances and the 3 aisles, and then the 4 pilasters in the middle that will support the dome above. And you're starting to see now some tracery and relief sculpture on these buildings. And I'm going to be posing a few questions about this as we go along this evening, because I'm puzzled by a few things. I want to share my puzzles with you. But this one has some painting in it. You can see those pendentives up there, those kind of curved, almost like shells, seashells up above. This church is actively being used. Zavrtnats was a cathedral. It was also close to Etchmiadzin. It was a circular cathedral. You can see the circle at the bottom of this drawing. And that's the problem it had. When you look at this as part of it, it's actually quite beautiful, wonderfully sculpted. I think a lot of Persian influence here as well. But you begin to see the top of these capitals. They're wonderfully loved by the carver. The view to Mount Ararat. But now when you look at this drawing, if you actually count the number of breaks in the structure, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 places it has no foundation. So in order for that structure to stand, at the base of each drum, it would have to be tied together by a tension facility, because the thrust is moving out. Something has to hold it in. And there was nothing there to hold it in. And so with enough earthquakes, it's going to fall to the ground, which it did. Yeraruk Basilica is 5th century. It's a very early building. It's a basilica plan. There was no apparent dome here. It's also a World Heritage Site. It's not a very pretty building, but there it is. It has a plinth, which is a flat area built up to level the ground around it. And it stood there. You can see the plan has no columns on the inside. That's the basilica, which something was to span across the entire thing. And because there was no lateral support in the north-south direction, earthquake hits and the walls are going to move and the drum's going to fall. But now look at this tracery. This is decidedly not Western. The arches are curved back in at the bottom, a very Islamic kind of thing. So there's influence here that's very hard to explain. And even the carving here is rather primitive. Arushavank, not too much later, 7th century, also basilica plan. It's a very large footprint for its time. That's this building. You can see that pure rectangle running around at the base until up above there's light being brought in from either side. And the way they did that was to put these pilasters midway through those walls, which gave it lateral stability and held a dome. Somehow the dome still fell, but I think they can put this one back. When you look at this, look how perfect that geometry is. These are people that know how to build pure circles and arches. Years ago, I heard that Armenians had invented the arch and the barrel vault, and the Romans took it from them. Nobody I know to ask to verify that, but I heard that at one point. But I could certainly believe at least a half-truth there. You've got this pure oculus at the top, which held a drum. You can see the pendentives, you see the arches. This is perfect geometry at work. And the church is in use today, such as it is. And there it is again. Sevanavank, you've probably been to Lake Sevan. These are not particularly handsome churches, but the site is. So I thought I'd share that with you. I thought the site was magical and stunning, and it's almost a moonscape. It's quite beautiful. But there's the composition of the chapels and the narthex, the Gavet, as we'd say, and the overview of Lake Sevan. It's a place, I'm told, that misbehaved priests in training were sent. And what a glorious place to be sent. So some of the carving, a lot of moss there, some of the carvings there, but it's magical. Tatev, I'm sure you've been to Tatev if you've been to Armenia. 9th century, center of economics, political stuff, spiritual, cultural activity, 4 universities. The Seljuk Turks burned 10,000 books that were there and manuscripts. But this one is breathtaking. The Swiss have built a cable car that takes you there, flies you there. We happened to fly in the fog. We disappeared into the fog. You didn't know where you're going or if you'd ever come out, and then you do, and you look down, and that's the site. It's pretty remarkable. But this is what it looked like on my first trip. And magical. I mean, how beautiful is that? Look at the carving here. Look at the skill in making the precision cutting of that stone for its very, very intricate woven pattern. The love and care that went into this building is phenomenal. It's a very odd plan. There's really only 2 pilasters there, but the dome is somehow held up on the walls on the left side. And there it is. It's a much more remarkable building on the outside than the inside. But you've got wood carving there. You got access points everywhere. You have these double crosses. I would like to learn from someone because the double cross appears periodically, and I'd love to know the meaning of that, but I don't understand what that guy, I don't understand that. But there it is, as I saw it. And then the second time I saw it, the sun was out. And what a difference. Look at the tracery around the drum of that 24-faceted folded plate roof on the top of the dome. You've seen conical domes. This is a folded plate. You get some structural stability out of that. And now you begin to look at the carving on every plane of that arch, on the face of the building, and so forth. And carving on small chapels, on tombs. Going back to this, the lower right image, all those carved crosses. I don't know if this is a kind of a form of priestly graffiti, or if this was a dedication. I mean, it was clearly a dedication, but they had time. And I wonder about the carving into those buildings. You look at where it's sited, it's built as a kind of a fortress. It's on the edge of this gorge. It is very protected by that. Look at that dome. Look at those facets sort of perfectly put together in the way they were. But if you can be that good in your geometry and that good at your perfect facets, right? Why does this one line up with the center of that, and that's on the edge, and that misses it entirely, and that's just off kilter? What's going on here? Why does that happen? I'm just not sure. But look at this. Look at this. How do you get material here to build this in those days and make it so perfectly? It's clearly an act of faith that keeps people there working year after year after year to build a building like this. But to build it perfectly. Nidivank is a chapel that very few people know about. I had heard about it. I hired a driver to take me to where we thought it was, and he stopped to ask directions, and the person who was there was in his early 50s. He said, "I've heard of it, but I've never seen it. I hear it's up the road." And less than a mile up the road, it was on the right. And he lived there his whole life. And there it is. Now you see, this is not a folded plate roof. This is just a patterned roof, like an umbrella roof, we'll call it. You see that little thing that comes out off the face of it between the two wings of the church? That's where the pendentive is, under that, to transfer the seismic forces laterally. It's clearly a very old site, very small chapel with very primitive carving. They were, after all, in a very hidden location. And actively in use today. Koshavank is in western Armenia. It's the 10th to 13th century. This was impacted by the famous Sykes-Picot Treaty that divided up Turkey, and Armenia came out of that into the Soviet side and so forth. They put the church 100 meters across the Armenian border in Turkey. Who would do that? I believe it was intentional. There it is. Here's the cemetery for that church. I went there. I could have climbed over the fence. I almost climbed over the fence. There was a guard station right there. It looked like it was unoccupied. I wish I had climbed over the fence, but I didn't, out of respect for my wife and kids. But now you're standing in the cemetery looking across the border at the church for which that was the cemetery. Who would do that? Marmoshin. Anybody been to Marmoshin? Ah, good. I didn't. Marmoshin. Okay, 10th to 13th century, northwestern Armenia. It overlooks a river. There are ruins of a circular chapel you'll see on the plan. Also a folded plate roof. There's the site. It's really pretty. And there's the plan. And guess what? The circular chapel collapsed. Now you think a circle is the perfect form, collapsed. But you can see the three chapels, the one at the top, the one at the bottom, and the one with the square in front of it, which is its gablet, its narthex, and in the larger chapel. So here you have it. As I look at this building, as I look at this image, I'm thinking every inch of this building is carved out of the same material. To build a building you're in, you've maybe got 90 different materials that build this building. That's built out of one material. The door openings, the lintels, the roofing, the rain protection, the decoration, all out of one material. The details, all out of one material. And inside, again, you see that perfect circle above, and the perfect arches and the pendentive all worked out in Armenia. Virtually everything I'm going to show you today preceded every cathedral in Europe. These aren't at the cathedral level, but preceded them. And many of the churches in Europe, which basically means that the prototypical forms that came out of these buildings were most likely replicated in Europe. There were early church buildings in Greece and in Cyprus before here, just a few. But this collection of buildings predates the ones there. Makaravank, anybody been to Makaravank? I'm winning with the M's. 10th to 13th century, it's a hidden forest complex. It's rather wonderful. There are 3 churches, there are 2 memorial chapters, a very compact composition, and a beautiful countryside. So part of being there is getting there, and getting there in some of these cases is extraordinary. You work your way up, that's the composition. And this is the buildings. See the pattern on the umbrella on the top of that drum? It's a drawing for that, and now the building. Again, very simple, very elegant. I was there one day, they were having a wedding. It was wonderful. There's the drawing. And then every so often you'll see a kind of a carving into the building like this, and it's sort of without apparent reason. There's no windows in this. It's not to bring in light. If it was to add lateral stability, there would be a column on the inside of that. It's very strange, but it appears in many, many Armenian churches. You see that on the face of the building on the right, and see the carving above the window on the building on the right. Quite extraordinary sighting of this building. And again, one material. Sundials start to appear on Armenian churches. Sundials, it's on the south face of these buildings. And then you see something like this. The carving of this bird, there was, I'm sure, a second bird on the other side, but bumping its head into the frame around the window. If you were a really good architect or even a really good artist, why would you bump the bird's head into the frame on the side of the window? I'm a little befuddled by some of this. But look at it, it's quite beautiful. Mindasanahin, anybody? Got a couple takers? 3, 4, 5, 6, okay. 10th century, it's a World Heritage Site. This had a university. It has, it's a conical dome. There's a library with 5 niches. You'll see those in a moment. And columns of wisdom. We know who the architect is of this building. The name translates, this is the one that's older than the other, because it's very close to another church. And we're going to the other one right after we do this. It's also very close in age to the other church. So here it is. You arrive here, it doesn't look like much. And then you look at that and say, oh, look how rich that is. The narthex, the entry is here. The main church is there. You come into the narthex here and enter that church, the little chapels on either side. These are the monks' learning cells. That's a second chapel. That's a third chapel. You come out here, that's a library. That's another chapel. That's a bell tower. So here you are coming in the entrance, and from the entrance looking out, and this cross section through the building. There you are looking out. This is on the right where the monks would be taught, where they can't see what the guy next to them is doing. So it gives privacy and assures security as you're learning individually. They're very mystical buildings. The quality of light is extraordinary. And then there are these odd things. Like, look at that column capital and base. It's almost as though it's getting a little tired holding up a lot of stone above it and needs to be held up a little more. But again, the perfect circle, the perfect pendentive, the perfect arch. And then you see this kind of decoration in that dome on the right. So, we'll go into the library. This is the drawing of it. This is the chapel. Now we're going to go into the library. So, these are separate categories for Syrian and Armenian books in the upper left, Greek and Arabic on the upper right, and Mongol in the middle. And the columns, the 4 columns that are in the middle of all of this, one is for wisdom, one's for theology, one's for culture, and one's for science. And this is what it's like to be there. So Hagpat, which is right next door, very close to this, built about 2 years later, was a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It was built at the permission of the Queen, had a university, major learning center for the Middle Ages. So this is that project. And that's the plan. Everything in that dark gray tone, that mass, is underground. Everything else is above ground. So you come through the wall, right there, and you immediately have a chapel here. You come up here to the main Gavet, to the main church here. You come over here to another chapel, and then here to a huge narthex, which is like a meeting area. You can come in here and come around into there, and you can come through here and up those stairs and into that bell tower and climb up. You're climbing up the soil here. You can go over here, and this is like a dining area, and there were monk stalls and things around like that. So some of the detail here, it's a little more elegant, a little more gentle, a little more polite, and a little better detailed. You see the yarn on the seat? That red ball? Right there. Gives you just a bit of scale for what you're looking at. And look at this. Is that beautiful? My goodness. All of this is carved. Yet another question I have is, if you can be so simple and so elegant with Euclidean geometry with the sanctuaries, why do the narthexes all look like they're industrial buildings? They're heavy. It's the arches that come through there are so much heavier than the arch that enters you into the sanctuary. It's always troubled me a little bit. Maybe it's just my Western aesthetic, but there it is. You get inside, and it's lovely. It's really wonderful. And lying on your back, looking up, so the chandelier is hung there. They're very much the same in all these churches. Pendentives are there. Everything's there. And then you see the, I think, clumsy. For me, it's kind of clumsy. But who am I? So here you are walking through the building. Then you find this narrow, these steps are about a foot wide. So you have to be very careful as you go up those steps. You find a step ladder up where the bells are, and you climb up there, and you get to a spot where you can go to that window, and you look out over the rooftop of this church composition, and you can see the parts that are buried underground and the landscape around, and then there's the site all together. It just really, I think, a wonderful composition. So I studied in graduate school with an architect, a world-famous architect, who was known for his buildings that practiced Euclidean geometric form. And in college, 2 years before I graduated, I went to Europe for 13 weeks and visited basically every cathedral in Europe that I had studied about. So I became very interested in how structure and light worked together. I became very interested in how geometry tied these buildings together. They created a predictability in terms of the structure, and they all tied to the liturgy of the church. So everything was there for a purpose. It wasn't you're building a shelter and occupying it. These are places where they store grain. and other carvings in the building. How does a cross get there on the left on that indented piece, if not by somebody with a little spare time in his hands? And then how does this happen? This collision of these two forms that seem never to be intended by the same person, yet there they are together. And then you see this, and you say, wow, how stunning is that? This is just drop dead gorgeous. This is in that spot where that little hole came through the soil. Just beautiful and sensitive for that building and that composition in that kind of place. Anybody been to Aktala? 2 people, 3 people. Well, Aktala caught me by surprise. I'd never heard of Aktala before. The 2 architects that I had brought to America to work with me on the documenting side on the American University of Armenia building took me to Aktala. And we drove up, and I saw that. I said, okay, we can keep going. And he said, I don't think so. We need to go inside that building. I said, it looks pretty run down. He said, we're going inside that building. The plan isn't even very wonderful. I mean, that's what it is, you know. You see the church is the top of your screen, that little bump on the top going off to the side. It's a chapel they kind of tacked on, like sticking a carrot on the head of your, and there it is. And yet, all these people were coming out of a wedding, and there was a drone flying overhead photographing the wedding. And I'm saying, who would have a wedding in such a place? That was the place. But that's why. I went, whoa, oh my gosh. Look at this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Just every inch of this on the inside. That's a temporary wooden roof. I expect they'll be rebuilding the drum and the dome on top of this at some point in time. But there it is. And it was like this ugly duckling from a distance becomes this extraordinary three-dimensional painting on the inside. So I started to walk around this building, this ugly duckling. And I go, there's some interesting moves here. This is an interesting one where one roof is kind of draining on the other, which is draining down below. And then I look up the image on the right. You see the cross is not centered on the peak of the roof. That can't be an accident. Who would do that? And the roof is not centered on the cross behind either. I'm sure they knew what they were doing, but what were they doing? And here it is again, an off-centered cross. It seems centered on the arch, but not on the peak. There's something going on here. And on the right image, look at that drainage system. It's remarkably odd. And yet, every place there's a carving, it's different than every other carving and interesting. And again, this cross is not centered on the peak of the pitch. But look at this gorgeous carving on this ugly duckling building. Every base is special. Everyone is interesting. Inside, outside, everywhere. It's done with such a labor of love. But I encourage you to go and visit this if you ever go back to Armenia. So we left. We said goodbye to Aktala. There it is, protected on that gorge. And we went to Ambird. I'm sure you've been to Ambird, yes? Somebody? Yes. I got more people? Okay. 7th century fortress, 10th to 13th century church, the fortress in the clouds. What's really interesting to me about this one is that it's not just the fortress that you see and the chapel on the left that you see and the gorge that you see, but look at this chapel out there in nowhere, and look how heavy the folds are on that folded plate roof. It's not delicate like Tatev. It's like a marching band going around that drum. And it's so forceful and so powerful, what could possibly hold it up? And what the architect has done is says, see those two spindly little columns at the base of each of those? That's what's holding it up. See those two spindly little pencil columns? Well, it's really the wall that's holding it up. But he's trying to send you a message that this is lifting to heaven. The weight of this dome is lifting to heaven. I think it's a stunningly poetic and beautiful gesture. When you come inside, it's a very simple, very elegant chapel. The same language that you've seen in most of the others. And again, all of these before any of the cathedrals of Europe. This one much more abstract, but elegant nonetheless. Probably been to Hagartsin, yes? Yeah, okay. They put you on a bus, they took you to Hagartsin. Okay. Soaring Eagle. So here it is, going through the shrubbery. And the first time I saw that was also in a dream. And there's the plan. This one had a benefactor. The Sultan of Sharjah funded the restoration of this church, and there it is today. This one would have lost its World Heritage Site designation because so much has been done to it. But imagine what this was like in the time it was built. The tree was there. And look at that building. Again, that tracery of those two simple little pencil columns, but now without the very powerful folded plate roof, but something more simple. Now, what you're standing in on the left would have been the Gavet. It would have been a covered space, but they left that open. And you come inside. These are chapels are lined up right next to it. The light pierces through this building like you wouldn't believe. Look at that. It's just remarkable. And there again is that dome held up by the drum, but giving you the impression that it's not the mass that's doing the work, but it's the hand of God. Again, a gorge, defensive. They've been attacked a lot. They don't want to have to defend four sides of the building. They want to defend one side of the building, if possible. They have limited resources. So there are two churches that came both from 4th, 10th, and 13th century. They were within a kilometer or two from each other. They both back up on the same gorge. Hovanovac Monastery is the first one. It was founded by St. Gregory. It's on a promontory overlooking these gorges. That's the gorge. That's the church. And you notice this one is the folded plate on the sanctuary building, a conical piece on the element that brings light to the Gavet. Very strange plan. That little angled thing comes out of it. There it is on the edge of the gorge. You can see they don't have to protect the building over there. And now, nicely detailed, but again, the cross is off center. Why is that happening? I have trouble sleeping at night worrying about this. And here, the columns on the face of the drum don't even touch the folded plate roof. It's a very contemporary idea. Actually, Sir Christopher Wren, when he designed one of his churches in London, had his design rejected by the elders in London because he said the structure wouldn't work. You have to put 2 more columns in between. So he put the columns there, and he located the beam an inch above the top of the columns where they couldn't see it. So the worthies of London thought he obeyed their direction, but only he and God knew the truth. It's like that right here. So there's a section through that building. And again, the cross is off center. So I'm speculating about this, and here's my speculation. If anyone been to New Mexico, and you've been to any of the areas where you can purchase Navajo rugs, you realize that Navajo Indians could knit perfect rugs. But they knew there was a spirit greater than themselves, and they always intentionally put one flaw in that rug, in that blanket, so that they would acknowledge that their great spirit was greater than they could ever be. I think that's where this comes from, but I would like someone to correct me if they know the answer. Off center. Pointed arch. Unusual. Now all these little carvings and things that appear throughout the building, and then some rather beautiful things here. And this is what brings light into the Gabbett. It also serves as a bell tower. And then you've got this arch within an arch, a door within an arch within an arch. And then one of those really narrow stairways, again, to take you up above. This seems to be a common theme. In this case, the dome here clearly had no painting on it because it's got 2 colors of stone in a very regular pattern, which is, in my mind, clearly part of the design intent. But here, a lot of carving going on, which is, in my mind, a real expression of love. It's wanting to be a part of something on a timeless kind of basis. But there it is, backed against the same gorge for the same reason. So Mosavank, here. Oh, sorry, this is the second one, so Mosavank. This one has a very simple drum, an umbrella cap, and a much more simple architecture on the outside. Then you go inside, and it's actually much more exotic. So one was highly decorated on the outside, simple on this side. It's the reverse on this building. Look at that. In this location, look at that. Is that stunning? I think it's stunning. How beautiful is that? My goodness. We have some paintings in this one, but the exterior is rather simple. Kacharas, been to Kacharas, anybody? Oh, boy, you've been around. Okay. 10th to 13th century, produced illuminated manuscripts here. It's a cultural center, it was a political center. It's a 3-building complex with a Gabbett. Main church on the left with a Gabbett to its left, secondary chapel on the right, and tiny chapel in between the two. You can see in the plan there, and the elevation there. And we're going to go take a walk now. It's very clean composition, well maintained. They were using this for a wedding the day we were there. Again, very narrow steps going up. That's the chapel. Gegard, you've all been to Gegard. 4th century, early building. Monastery of the Cave and the Monastery of the Spear, World Heritage Site. But this one is exceptional. So everything in dark gray in building plan is built above grade. Everything in light gray in building plan is in the rock. And everything is a gray pattern is underground, like that. So you can see the two chapels on the left are carved into that mountain. The church on the right was freestanding, laid against the mountain. So we're going to go inside. You come through the gate, you go up. And so another question I have is, if you can get all these stones laid perfectly, why is the lintel tilted like that? How could that happen? Who could have carved it like that? It's not just the photography, because this has happened, you can see it 3 times. So why is that happening? You come inside, there's some really wonderful play of light inside. Structure and light work together, so the absence of structure is light. So when you see the tracery wrapping around that shell-shaped piece on the right image, you understand they're working real hard with this to make light work perfectly. And then you see those crosses carved into those openings, which catch the glancing sun so they can be read more easily. And inside, again, the dome and the pendentives and the columns and the capital above where the column comes to the ground. And then look at this. My goodness, in these secondary spaces, there have been all these really beautiful, loved ceilings that are eloquently carved. And then something as wonderful as this. So what you're seeing throughout this project is, let's back up a slide. You see every single stone here, okay? You know that every piece was cut to a different shape and plotted and put in the place it was supposed to see, right? What do you see here? What don't you see here? You don't see space between stones. This is one stone. This was carved out of one huge stone. That's the crack. There are no breaks in this except where there are cracks. This is all one huge piece of stone, all the way to the ground. How did they do that? You see the stones here, but not here, nor here. How did they? That doorway? I still don't get it. Okay, Goshabank. Been to Goshabank? Of course you have. All right, the historic needle-carved Hachkar. So there was a book depository and a library. There were 2 floors. There was an opening between the floors. There was a school building, exterior stair like Norabank. A lot is going on in this site here. The glass domes, I think, are there not only to protect the interior, but they're there to preserve a kind of a World Heritage candidacy on this building. Because if they replace them, they would lose that. So that's the plan. This is Ghosh. I'm imagining this was a couple that died together. And you have some wonderful moments in this building and a lot of writing on the walls. You see the second story there on the left. Again, pure geometry. There's another tilted lintel. If you could make such a perfect carving, why is it tilted? And then this very heavy stuff going on here. Look at that. Look at that. It's really a collision of structure. But here it is. This is the Hachkar that everybody talks about. Just stunning in person and stunning in every way. Noravank, you've been to Noravank, I wouldn't even look up to see. It's the only location in Armenia where God is depicted in a stone sculpture. So it's very much like Bryce Canyon in Utah. If you've ever been there, there it is at the top of the hill. Now remember, back in the days, these were built, people didn't wear glasses, so warring armies coming in would have trouble detecting the building against the background of stone of the same color. So that's the site plan, the floor plan. That's the original church building. Some Hajj cars. We're going to go inside that building. There in the upper right is the image of God and the carving. You see this? I'm showing you this because this is one building being roofing and flashing and drip line and eave and everything else on the building. One material. And then you see something like this. Now this one is the chapel everybody remembers. It's the one that's a two-story building with that stairway that goes up like that. And if you go up follow your way up that stair, you see a spot where the tracery comes down and around. It sticks out. You actually have to get on your hands and knees to get through there to get in that chapel. You can't stand up straight to get in. It's very narrow. That step is like this. So imagine you are an invading soldier with your armor on and your shield and a spear or a sword, and you have to go up with your back to the wall, right? And you get to that spot where you've got to get down and bend under and get underneath the thing and start to stand up again. And the very wonderful, self-respecting monk or priest just gives you a little nudge with his foot, and down you go. And the door opens at the bottom, and there's a guy to knock you out and drag you in. That's safe. I'm just speculating. So the tracery on this is elegant and quite beautiful, but then again, look at on the left one where those little star-shaped things just sort of appear in random locations. I'm sure there's meaning for all of this. There's the stairway going up. There's a soldier going up the stair. And there it is looking through this. This composition for this site was what informed my design for the Avedisian building at the American University of Armenia, where the buildings kind of move around like that. They're transparent, you look through them, and so forth. Incredible. St. Katolik, this is in Yerevan. It's the little building, not the big building. I saw this when I was in Yerevan in 1989, but it was behind a Soviet apartment block. The Soviets knew they couldn't demolish churches in Armenia, or they'd have a revolution, but they could hide them. And they put a building behind this. It was torn down. In Gyumri, which was Leninikon at the time, when the earthquake hit, the buildings that hid their second largest church collapsed. The church didn't. Providence, I think. So that's this little building that predates a lot of the others. I'll fly through that. The Ireni Church, we know the architect here, Mamek Varbet. 24 folded plate facets on the top of, see them? Can you count them all? No, I can't either, but there they are. The drum and the folded plate of this is just spectacular. You see the openings alternate between rectangular and curvilinear, rectangular, curvilinear. It's the only place I've seen that. Just stunning little building, little chapel. Nice carving, really delicate here. You go inside, and here in the pendentive you see a sculpture. And I begin to wonder if that wasn't the case in many of these other churches as well. But very simple building on the bottom. It gave it all to the top. In a sense, they gave it all to God. Gladzor, I don't think anybody's been to. No? I'm guessing not. Here it is, Gladzor. This is a major learning center. Look how high the drum is compared to the church itself. I think there was a main building that sits on the right, which had become a cemetery since then, but I think there was a bigger building there just by the shape of it and the other buildings. But a lot of little curiosities on this building. Here are these two birds are there over the sundial. Here is a frequently repeated imagery, iconography. Yegvard, anyone been to Yegvard? Didn't think so. Holy Mother of God Church, that's Yegvard. It's one of the most beautiful churches I've been to. Look at the tracery on this building. Look at that, and so beautifully preserved. I couldn't get into the chapel. It's upstairs. It requires a stepladder to get to it. It means that there wasn't a permanent stair. The sanctuary was protected. Look at that bird, my goodness. And this. The kind of love and care and attention that went into these buildings is just phenomenal. Caputan, this is in the same era of those buildings. It's a chapel on top of another building. And here, you're going to see in just a second the built-in step, but it doesn't wrap around the building. You have to get to it with like a stepladder before you get to the stone step. So it was clearly for defensive reasons. Okay, we're approaching the end here. So now we're going to Artsakh. We'll see 3 buildings in Artsakh. Dadivank, if you've been to Artsakh, you've been to Dadivank. It's a 16-facet umbrella dome founded by Saint Dadi, who's a disciple of Thaddeus. And this is it here. It's a pretty intensive complex here. Very simple kind of exterior, but then a lot of kind of Persian iconography on the side of that. And here as well, you can see the arch turning back in. And yet, probably the second best hotchkars that I saw in Armenia are at this building. They took them and brought them to Armenia when they left Artsakh. This one has paintings in it. Here, this is hotchkars here. And then Gansasar. This is like a masterpiece of Armenian architecture. It means treasure mountain. It's a pretty incredible place. And there it is. A compound like the others. And look at the facets on that building. It's really pretty. Again, the cross is offset. So this is not an accident. This is intentional. Look at that. Look at that. Cluster columns holding up the base of that folded plate roof. And this time they brought those cluster columns inside. So what was on the outside now reappears on the inside. It's the first time I saw that. And even the muscle building structure on this reveals yet a wonderful, wonderful ceiling above the gavet. That narrow stair going up, again, a common theme. A lot of carving in this building. Very elegant. So Gitchivank, I'm sure, is a place that no one's been to. 12th century, badly damaged, highly desecrated. Very remote location. You see it? Hard to spot. There it is. When I was there, there was a crew of people working on this, restoring it, cleaning it, bringing it back to life. I was there, I think, the year before the invasion. Very odd plan. But now you look at this and you say, who's tagging these buildings? Who's getting structure up that high to spray paint in those domes? How is that happening? What kind of person would do something like this? Who would do this? The person that took me here, this young architect, had been hired to restore one of the two mosques in Shushi. He was restoring that faithfully. And this is what they do in return. So I'll close with the cemetery. You've probably been there if you've been to Lake Sevan. Just that it's the largest collection of cemetery structures like this. You kind of learn a lot about what people must have done for a living, or how they were regarded, or how people, how they knew them, and so forth. So it's a good way to end, I think, as a kind of a final resting place for our trip. Thank you. If you have questions, I'm happy to take them.
All right, I'll just project. We're going to go some time for a Q&A. Thank you, Mr. Altoon, for that incredibly interesting presentation on the monasteries and their various ones. This is my work, but we'll get it right going. If you have a question. Yeah, we'll
Okay, I'll come up here. There's a question. Oh, by the way, I think unless someone's going to mention, I thought I would mention, what I've been trying to do, I could never find a book that pulled all these projects together. So I commissioned these drawings in the interest of having a book published about them. I had a publisher ready to go, and he came back and said, I just don't see a market for it. I said, how many books do you have to sell? He said, well, our first printing would be 3,000. I said, and how many do you need to guarantee in order to print those 3,000? He said, 1,000 books. I said, so if I bought 1,000 books from you today, you'd print the book. He says, yeah, I think so, but we still need to be convinced there's a market. And I said, there are 600,000 Armenians in Los Angeles. In one heartbeat, you're going to sell 3,000 books. And anyway, I'm going to, in the room, I've got a, if you care to, I have a sign-up sheet not to buy the book, but just to express interest in seeing what the book looked like if it was published. And I'll show you an example of the quality of the book so you get a sense for that. I remember coming back to LA in 1969, and my sister-in-law had on her coffee table the book of illuminated manuscripts that was published in San Lazaro. It's about that thick, about that big, Armenian manuscripts, Armenian illuminated manuscripts. It was a stunning book. And what I realized was every prominent Armenian family that I knew had that on their coffee table, because it was the only way they had to share who the Armenian people were with their neighbors and friends. So where's the buildings? And there was no single book. So that's what I'm trying to do. But there's no commitment. I just wanted you to be, if you're inclined to support making a publisher aware that there's interest, that's what the sign-up sheet would be for. So questions? There was a question. Yeah.
Any idea if the Florentine architect Brunelleschi had any ideas about the Armenian domes?
Well, I don't know whether Brunelleschi did or not. That was certainly a much more ambitious undertaking than any of these domes. I wonder if Sinan understood the dome when he designed the dome on Hagia Sophia, which was the only dome out of 23 that remained. You know, so hard to tell. That's saw another hand somewhere at one point. Yes.
Yes, thank you so much for this seminar. It's amazing. I know when you're there, or when I was there, most of the time is spent looking up and at the fascinating architecture. I was just wondering what they would be using as foundations in different scenarios, different areas of construction.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that. I imagine that if they didn't build on rock itself, they would have put large stones down that would spread the vertical load.
Hello.
We have a less overturning possibility. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
I'd like to thank you very much. Excellent presentation.
Thank you.
Wonderful pictures. I've seen many of these monasteries. Thank you very much. But I must say you've tainted me, because having seen these all over the years, and I've visited many of them, and I see them through a different light now with all these irregularities. I always thought they were perfect monasteries and churches. Now there's some imperfections in them. So I've got a tainted view of it. Next, I'll be heading to Armenia in about a month's time, and I'll be looking at them. Yeah, I got to double check all these crosses and irregularities. But out of curiosity, do you have any opinion as to, since you point out the cross is not centered, the lintel is off, and this and that, what would be the reason? You've said, how could they do this? What would they do? Is there anything documented anywhere as to, was there a reason for it, or could it be natural settling over time?
No, it's not a question of settling. It's where it was placed in the facade. I've just come to imagine in my mind and believe that it was a way to demonstrate a deference to God, that a person as skilled as they were could not produce something better than what God could produce, and therefore they made an obvious mistake to let you know this was a human thing. Yeah.
Not a supernatural thing, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's my sense.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was wonderful to see and to get a sense of the sublime, not just with the buildings, but with the settings.
Yeah.
But I'm used to thinking of cathedrals and as in the European sense that they were all often surrounded by a thriving community
they're
for
urban.
protection. So would these have been, like the pictures now, they're remote, would there have been thriving communities around? Or?
Not in the immediate location. There were clearly probably villages around. They had to get food, they had to get provisions, but I don't think there's a lot of evidence. I mean, where Etchmiadzin in, probably yes, but, and Yerevan and Gumri, but I think when you look at these remote sites that clearly had to be defended, I think monks were in danger of losing their life for their faith. So they had to do this in places that were not easily accessible, not on major trade routes, up in canyons, where trade would go someplace else. Too hard to get to, if you were going to try and attack them. If you're a soldier with armor on and you're trying to get up that hill, you're dead by the time you get up there.
So it reminds me of the Celtic kind of, the monasteries away in the remote areas. Is that the kind of?
Probably, yeah, I think, yeah.
All right, we'll do one more question. 2 more questions.
How many years did it take you to start and finish this project?
I'm still working on it. It's been 35 years. And I would tell you I'm done if the publisher called me tomorrow and said, let's do it. And I would tell you if I don't get that call, as soon as I feel I can do it safely, I want to sneak into Iran and go to 2 more facilities, St. Thaddeus Vank and Stephanos. Yeah, I want to go visit those. I guess I'm going to have to go into Turkey and see some things there. But my hope is that there's still a few more in Armenia I haven't seen. And if they agree to publish this, I would let them know that a 2nd volume's coming. Yeah.
All right, we're going to do the last question of the night.
Do you have any plan to go to Western Armenia to see some church. For example, I came from Diyarbakir, Dikranagert. They have two beautiful church. One of them, Giragos, now in most visited Armenian church all the world. Every day, at least 800 people, they visit them. And do you have any plan to add this beautiful presentation, those two churches, Surp Giragos and Surp Sarkis?
If I get there, I would add them.
No, we can invite you.
Yeah.
Because...
well, write down the names of the churches and where they are, and
okay.
I'll try and put it on my docket.
Okay.
Okay? I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hopefully we can all get that invite. Thank you once again, Mr. Altoon, for your time. Thank you. If there are any more questions after, you can catch Mr. Altoon outside right before he leaves. But I would first like to invite Dr. Ani Hasirjan up as one of our community representatives to present Mr. Altoon with a small gesture of our appreciation.
Uh-oh.
I would like to invite the pastor of our church to join me, because this was a collaboration between the Armenian Missionary Association of Canada and our church, the Armenian Evangelical Church of Toronto. So, Badreli, I would like to ask you also to join us, please.
So people can see.
So people can see.
You in between.
I'll first try and read, then I'm going to present it to you. To Mr. Ronald Altoon, on behalf of the Armenian Missionary Association of Canada and the Armenian Evangelical Church of Toronto, June 13, 2025, Toronto, Canada. This is the Khachkar at our church.
Oh, yes.
And I'm happy to announce that it is designed by my dear brother, Hagop Janbazian. It's the monument which stands for
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and we're very happy to have you here tonight.
Thank you.
And tomorrow, the Armenian Evangelical Church of Montreal will enjoy your presence.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pastor Zorab, if we can conclude the evening with your thoughts and prayer.
Thank you. Yeah. Good evening, everyone, brothers in Christ, Terhair, Adveli, friends and faithful people of God. Mr. Altoon, thank you to you too for your dedication and love for the Church of our Lord Christ and for our heritage as Armenians, for the monuments and the monks and the churches that we've built. Before I forget, I want to thank all the members of the committee of AMAC and the church who dedicated their time and very peculiarly worked. The guys here with the committee members, our women from the church who prepared the reception, and thank you all for attending. This is a collaboration, and this is the church, and I'm going to refer to that in moments, what the church means. But we don't want to forget that all that we've seen is a reflection of God's people for their love to Christ. These aren't just stones put together for the sake of design. This was a place they worshipped God. But in order to worship Him, they wanted to show their love and took that risk to go up, high up, put these stones on top of each other, risk their lives. It shows their love for Christ. And we're grateful to our heritage that we are Armenians, and we are known as the city or the nation of 1,001 churches and many more. That's something to be proud of. but we have to learn to keep them, not only as architecture, but also in our hearts. Because I want to refer to Ephesians chapter 4, verses 11 to 13. It says, God gave his people gifts, some apostles, some prophets, some teachers, some pastors, some evangelists. But the whole purpose of all that was that we build up the church. And we are the church. That's what Jesus says. We are the church. And we want to honor the buildings that the church is within. And that's why Mr. Altoon had dedicated most of his time to go find these and be fascinated by. But more importantly, I think what Mr. Altoon has done is showing his love as well for God and Christ and his church. So my prayer today is that we all, as we were enriched in our minds of knowing our heritage and how rich our Christian life and faith is, at the same time our hearts were nourished by re-seeing and living what these ancient Armenians, I could say, like, what, almost 1,000 years ago, how they lived their life. And at the same time, it reignited, at least in me, and I'm sure in some of you, or all of you, that heart, that fire of the Spirit. You said the bird a few times. That bird represents, that's the dove, that's the Spirit descending on us. That ignites our hearts with the fire of loving God and being dedicated to Him. So that's my prayer today for you all. At the end, I'll pray, and then I'll ask Deraev to come and say Babanich for all of us before we leave into the reception. So let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and love and grace. We thank you for all that you have given us, that you have given us an illuminator, that you have given us monks and priests and dedicated people who wanted to show their love to you. We thank you, Lord. We ask you, Lord, that same love and dedication and commitment to honor you and love you and live for you may be with us and every one of us as Armenians today through your Spirit, especially with Mr. Altoon and the architects and the builders and the designers and everybody who was involved in building the churches. And above all, we ask you, Lord, to come and change our hearts, because now we are the church. You call us church. We want to live in a way that brings honor and glory to you and your name through our nation, to our churches, to our charitable organizations. We pray this in your holy name, Jesus. Amen. Deraev, please, the Babanich.
Նախքան Բաբանիչը սիրելիներ, անպայման գուզեմ մի քանի նախատասություն խոսել, բայց հայերենով, որպեսզի գարենամ լավ արդայդվել, եթե թարգմանության պետք ունի, կգարձեմ, թե շատ էլ կան, որ գնան թարգմանել ինչ-որ պիտի ասեմ։ Նախ ես կբարդիմ շնորհակալություն, երյակ շնորհակալություն։ Առաջինը մեր Աստծո, որ այս երկար դժվար հոգնեցիչ օրը ունեի, ինձ խթանեց, մղեց, որ կամ, որովհետև վերնակիրը ինձ համար շատ հետաքրքրական էր եւ զրույթություն չնեմ հոգնելու բادرվագով։ Երկրորդ շնորհակալությունս մեր սիրելի եղբոր Բադվելին, որ մեզի հրավեր արդեն ուղղած էր, իսկ երրորդ շնորհակալությունը պիտի ուղղեմ բարոն Altoonին։ Եվ որ նստած մտիկ կնեինք, Բադվելին հարցուց ինձի, եւ որ նորավանքը ցույց կտայիք։ Սա դեռ նորավանք կացած ես։ Սաբես նայեցա, ասի, այո, կացած եմ, բայց գարձես թե չեմ կացած։ Իրապես շատ կարևոր եւ շատ հետաքրքրական նյութ մներ, որ ներկայացուցիք, Այդ բոլոր դեղերը, որ ցույց տվիք, մեծ մասամբ այցելած եմ, բայց կգարձեմ, որ անգամ եւս այցելելու պետք ունիմ ուրիշ նայվածքով նայելու, ուրիշ ցեմոդենալու։ Երկրորդ միտքը, որ ուզեմ փոխանցել, եւ որ գտեսնենք մենք այս հարստությունը, հոգեվոր գողմի մասին շատ պիտի չխոսեմ, որով Վադվելին արդեն խոսեցավ։ Մենք որպես հայեր եւ որպես քրիստոնյաներ այս բոլորը ունենալով անգեղծ ըլլալու համար առավել եւս կոչված ենք նախ պահելու այս բոլորը որպես ազգային ժառանգություն եւ հարստություն եւ ավելցնելու այն շուտ նույն օրինակին հետևելով եւ երկրորդ երբեք մենք մեզի արիթը չտանք եւ չարդոնենք որպեսի հերանանք մեր հավատքեն, մեր Աստծմեն, մեր Քրիստոսեն, որ ներշնչած է բոլոր այս ամենը։ Շնորհակալություն անգամ եւս պարոն Altoon ձերս ներկայացումին համար։ Աղոթենք միասին։ Դեր ողորմիա, բահբանիչ եւ հույս հավատացելոց Քրիստոս Աստված մեր։ Բահյա, բահբանիա եւ օրհնյա մեր երկիրն Հայաստան եւ քո հավատավոր ժողովուրդդ ընթովանիավ սուրբ եւ բադվական խաչիկոյի խաղության փրկյա եւ ազատյա երևելի եւ աներովի տշնամվույն արժանավորյա քոության բարովերս քեզ ընթոր եւ ամենասուրբ օգույտ այժմ եւ միշտ եւ հավիտյանս հավիտենից ամեն օրորին վացկա կդարլա